Hello, welcome to this tutorial of a watercolor robin. So this does come with my DIY watercolor kit that's available on my website at littlerosetta.com. However, if you don't have the kit, not to worry, you can still complete this painting as long as you have some watercolors, a brush, watercolor paper. All you need to do is sketch out the drawing. So what I have in front of me today is my number 8 brush, which does come as part of the watercolor kit. I have my pre-printed sketch on just some Canson hot press watercolor paper, and I just printed that out using an inkjet printer. I have some salt, which I will be using to add some texture into the background. It creates some really nice effects in your wet washes. And then I have my paint, of course, so I'm using lemon yellow, cadmium red, ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, and lamp black, and these are Winsor & Newton watercolors. However, you can use whatever paint you happen to have at home. You'll just need to make sure that you have a yellow, a red, a blue, some kind of brown, and a black. You can even make this painting without the brown and the black. You'll still be able to make those nice green colors in different tones. So yeah, this is very versatile, whatever you have at home. I also have my paint palette here, a little bit of toilet roll again to create some interesting textures in the background, and we can use that to mop up any excess water we might have on our paper. And then one thing that I find really important when working with watercolors is using 2 different cups of water. So I have one that's going to be my dirty cup and the second that's going to be my clean cup. Anytime you have paint on your brush, you're going to first dip into your dirty water, clean off your brush, make sure you get all of the paint out of there, wipe it off onto your paper towel or cloth or whatever you have, and then you're going to want to dip into your clean water anytime you want to pick up fresh paint. So that's just going to help keep your colors nice and vibrant. You're not going to get any muddiness or over mixing of colors. So that just kind of results in some grayish tones and browns that you might not necessarily want in your painting. And I've just taped down my sketch here with some painter's tape or masking tape. You can also use washi tape. Is really nice because it's not super harsh adhesive, so it's easier to pull back, but we'll talk more about that later. Okay, so once you're ready, we can get right into painting. So again, with my number 8 brush, I'm going to dip into my clean water first, and we're just going to soak the entire surface of the paper. Don't worry too much if you miss spots. You just want to make sure that you're not adding too much water to the surface where it's like puddling and pooling. You can kind of take a look from the side and you'll be able to see the areas that are wet versus the areas that are dry. So the areas that are dry will remain matte, and the wet areas will have a nice sheen to them. So again, just making sure that it's nicely coated. And you might notice that your paper starts to warp and buckle. That's okay. The tape is there to help flatten it out as it dries later on. And if you do end up adding too much water to your surface, you can always dry off your brush and go in with a clean brush and mop that up, or you can use your paper towel or your paper roll and pick that water right back up. Okay, and once you're ready with that stage, again, we're going to pick up some clean water and we're going to make a nice green color. So we're going to take some of that lemon yellow and a little bit of our blue. And to activate your paints, you just want to add a little bit of water to each paint, and that'll just loosen it up a bit and make it easier to pick up. So that lemon yellow, that blue, and you can test your mixture on a swatch card, as you can see I have here, and then we're just going to drop that into the background. You can be really loose, you don't have to worry about being perfect at this stage. And you can mix up your tones and your colors. You can add whatever you want into this background. You just want to make sure that you're adding in quite a bit of color. It might seem a little scary at first, but watercolor does dry much lighter. So you just want to keep that in mind as you're adding in your colors here. I'm going to add just a little bit of pure blue just to kind of hint at a sky in the background. And you just kind of add that in wherever you see fit. There's no right or wrong here. And you can get really messy and really creative here. You can even add in little splatters. And it's nice to add in some salt at this stage. So just taking a bit of that salt and dropping it in, not all over the page, but just in a few areas to add some interesting textures. Okay, and once you're happy with that, we're going to let it dry and move on to the next stage. So if you're finding that this is having a hard time drying or it's taking a while, you can always pull out a hair dryer and on a low setting just kind of blast it a little bit with that heat, and that'll help dry your paper much faster. So that's what I'm going to do right now. Okay, so once your paper is fully dry, you can wipe off any salt that you might have added to the surface. And you can see all those beautiful textures that we created. See how nice that is? And those will show through as we continue painting. Okay, and so our next stage is going to be adding in the red breast and some of the shadow underneath the wings here. So we're first going to take some of our clean water. We're going to wet the breast area. You don't need to be perfect here, and don't worry. Any paint that might have gotten into that area, we're going to cover up anyway. And so we're going to take, again, some clean water, some of that lemon yellow, and we're going to create an orange. So the lemon yellow and a little bit of the cad red. And you want to mix a nice kind of neutral orange, so not too red and not too yellow. That looks pretty good, and then you're just going to drop that in. Again, not worrying too much about being perfect at this stage. Any mistakes you make, you can kind of lift out, or you can cover up again later. And I'm gonna add a little bit more yellow to the left-hand side here, where the sun, or the sun would naturally be hitting the robin. And if you've found that you've put on too much pigment, you can always, again, clean off your brush and just pick some of that paint out. We call that using a thirsty brush. And don't worry too much about the drawing at this stage. It's totally okay to go over it. Okay, and when you're happy with that, you're going to clean off your brush, and then we're going to make a bit of a grayish blue color for the shadow underneath. So taking some of your ultramarine blue and a little bit of the burnt sienna. The orange in the burnt sienna is going to cancel out the blue in the ultramarine blue because they are complementary colors. So that means that when you're looking at a color wheel, they're sitting on opposite ends of each other. So anything sitting on an opposite end on a color wheel is called a complementary color, and they will neutralize each other. So when you mix them, they'll create more of a grayish kind of brown color. So see, that's quite gray. So that looks good. We're just gonna drop that in underneath. And you want it to be lighter as you move upwards and more to the left-hand side. And don't worry if these mix together, that's totally okay. It'll just kind of create a bit more of a softer effect. And keeping in mind here that your colors are going to dry quite a bit lighter than they look when you initially put them down. And don't forget to keep using your swatch card here and checking your mixes. It takes a little bit of kind of fiddling around to get used to how watery you want your mix to be or how thick, and so it's really nice to have that swatch card. And another thing to keep in mind is we're using the white of the paper to create our lights in our painting. So you typically don't have a white watercolor. You're always going to be using the white of the paper. So it's really important to pay attention to how transparent your washes are, so how much water you're using. And once you're happy with that, we're gonna leave that to dry. Okay, so once those areas are fairly dry, we're gonna move on to the head and the wing area. So we're gonna be creating a bit of a darker brown color. So you wanna take some of your burnt sienna. And again, some of that blue. We're gonna create a bit of a thicker mix here, so we want it to be quite dark. That looks good. And you can make it more on the blue side or you can make it more on the redder side. I personally prefer it on the bluer side. You can see the difference here. So this one is a little bit more blue, this one is a little bit warmer in tone. It doesn't matter, it'll look nice both ways. It's just a personal preference. So this is looking good to me, so I'm gonna go in and just add that onto the head. Again, keeping in mind that the left hand side is where the light is gonna be hitting the bird, kind of like the left top area here. So you don't wanna make that area too dark. And you want to make sure you're leaving that white around the area of the eye. So you can fill that in, and you can also lift out that area where the light is gonna hit if you think it's too dark there, if you want a little bit more contrast. And we can always go over that again later with another wash of color. Then you're just gonna bring that down into the wing. And at this point, it gets a little bit tricky. You wanna make sure that you're leaving some white lines to kind of show where the feathers are laying on top of each other. So just using the point of your brush to create those lines and drawing them down. Don't worry if you go over some spots or that you meant to leave white, it's totally okay. And you can break up those lines to kind of show the smaller sort of feathers that are laying on top of each other. You really don't need to be perfect at really any of these stages. We can always go back in and add more layers and fix things up if you feel the need to later on. I'm just gonna add a little bit more darkness on the head here. It felt like I lost some of that pigment. And again, if you go over the lines of the drawing, that's totally okay. As you can see from even the two different paintings that I did here, they're both the same drawing with the same materials, but they look like very different paintings just because of slightly differences in technique, different colors used. So yours is probably not going to look exactly like mine either, and that's perfectly all right. And we will go back into this and darken it up and add some more contrast later on. And you can pull that same color into the tail as well, maybe making it a little bit darker. And using the same technique of leaving some of those white spaces, just to hint at the layering of feathers here. Oops, that was too much water that I just added there, so I'm just going to lift that up. And I'm going to stop messing around with that. So once you're happy with that, then we will go on to the next stage. You don't actually need to wait for this layer to dry because we're going to go into the feet next, and because they're not touching, you don't really need to worry about leaving it to dry. Okay, so for the feet, we're going to make more of a purpley color. So you're going to want to take some of your cadmium red and a little bit of your ultramarine blue. We want this to be fairly dark as well. So a bit of a thicker consistency in our paint. Maybe a little bit of the burnt sienna, just to tone it down a little bit more. And that's looking good. So using the tip of your brush, you can kind of smush it down into your palette to create more of a tip. So I don't know if you'll be able to see it there, but you can kind of create a bit of a tapered edge. Like that, and you can use that to create nice lines. So along the right hand side of the leg here, you're just going to create some lines, kind of breaking up that line with some little dots and dashes just to give it a little bit more texture, so it's not just a straight perfect line. And then bringing that around back for the back toes. Birds kind of have this weird texture on their feet, right? It's kind of scaly, so you don't want it to be perfect. You can kind of add in those little dashes and dots to hint at that texture. And again, really don't need to worry too much about being super perfect here. The feet are going to kind of get a little bit lost in the branch when we add that in later, so it's not a huge kind of deal breaker if this doesn't look exactly how you'd like it to look. And you can pick up some of that pigment if you've laid down too much in areas, and just kind of break up the colors just to create some extra texture there. So we don't want these to be, you know, the main focus. We want these to be kind of a little bit more toned down in comparison to like the head and the bird itself. Okay. So I'm gonna let that dry now, and then we'll go on to the next stage. See you soon. Okay, so once that last stage is nice and dry, we're gonna move on to adding in some more details. So first we're gonna start off with the pupil and the beak here. So you're gonna want to take some of that lamp black, and you want this to be a fairly thick mixture. You want it to be quite dark. This is where our contrast is gonna come in. And for the pupil here, all right, just zoom in a little bit. You want to create more of a kind of C shape and leave the white around the pupil and then a little highlight as well. So you want to make sure that you're leaving that space and using just the tip of your brush here. Being very light-handed and taking your time. And you can kind of bring it around a little bit. And that looks pretty good. And then for the beak, you're gonna create a little V shape. Just kind of following that drawing, but not being too precious about that. And you can lift up some of the pigment from the center of the beak just to create some highlight there and to give it a little bit of extra dimension. Okay, so that's great. We might go back into there and darken up that beak a little bit more later on, but that looks good for now. Now the next thing I want to do is add in some more color into the breast area. Just keep in mind that this beak here is still wet, so you can either let this completely dry or just do your best to avoid that area. It should dry fairly quickly, so there's not a lot of water on there. So I just want this to be a little bit brighter, a little bit more pigmented. So I'm gonna go back into our lemon yellow and create another kind of darker orange mixture here. Making sure that my mix is a little bit thicker so that I'm getting a better sort of pigment payload on there. Okay. And by going in wet onto dry, so the paper is dry and the paint of course is wet, we're gonna get less blending out and a higher concentration of pigment. Now you can use your water to help spread that pigment around and to create some sort of gradients and some different textures and effects here. And just kind of let the watercolor do its thing, which is to kind of flow and create some beautiful shapes. Okay, and I'm just going to drop in some more yellow to that left-hand side. And at this point you could add in some salt to this area if you want to create a little bit more texture in there. That could look pretty cool. It's completely up to you. It's your painting. And so you're just adding and lifting up pigment. Just kind of as you see fit. There's no right or wrong. And again, you can use your paper towel or toilet roll to lift up some of that pigment. And it will kind of act like a sponge and leave some of the texture from the paper behind. And again, you want to make sure that you're not using too much water at this stage. And if you have accidentally added in too much, you can just lift it right back out. No big deal. Okay, I'm feeling pretty happy with that. Now I want to go back in and darken up some of these feathers on the wing here. So with that ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, maybe a little tiny bit of the lamp black just to darken it up. And I'm gonna pull, just do the same thing, just adding in a little bit of darkness in some areas where I feel like it could use some contrast. Okay, I think that's looking pretty good. I think that I want just a little bit more of a shadow on this foot here, so I'm just gonna take some of that same mixture and just add it along to that right hand side, just to create a little bit more definition and to just hint at that sort of shadow. Okay, and once we're happy with that, again, let it dry and we'll come back in and we're gonna add in that branch here. Okay, great. So once you're ready to move on to the next stage, we're going to add in our branches in the background. So all of these branches here, and you can see that I've left areas of white just to kind of add a little bit of highlight and like that speckling effect that we get when light kind of shines through trees and it's shining through the leaves and leaving shadows behind. So we're going to create a nice sort of greeny brown color. So we're going to take our burnt sienna, some of our yellow, and then some of our blue. And you don't need to make this, again, the exact same color that I have on my palette. It's totally okay if yours is a little bit more blue or a little bit more brown or whatever. It's totally okay. And I'm going to vary up the kind of shades and tones that I use throughout these branches anyway. So everybody's is going to look unique. And I encourage that creativity and letting your kind of hands do whatever they want. You're never going to get the exact same results that I get, and as you can see, I'm not going to get the same results that I've gotten in the past either. So again, just adding your shadows to the right hand side and leaving some of those sort of speckled highlights on the left hand side, just to add some texture and some interest to your painting. And keeping in mind where the light is naturally going to hit. And you can use the shape of your brush to help you, especially in the areas where you're adding in your own branches. So this branch, for example, I'm gonna bring back up behind the bird and up off the page here. And so I'm just holding the brush very lightly and letting it sort of glide along the page. And you can use small little dashes and lines to create that texture. Doesn't need to be perfect here, and you can add as many little off branches as you'd like. Again, just using that sort of edge of the brush to create those thin lines. So branches tend to be thicker at the bottom and taper off and get thinner as they go out. So to do that effect, you want to press harder to create a thicker line, pull and kind of lift off as you go, and you're going to create a bit of a thinner line as you lift off, and you're just using the very tip of your brush. So push down more to use the thickness of your brush, pull and lift to taper. Hopefully you can see that there. And you can, your swatch card is really going to come in handy, so you can practice that as much as you'd like until you're comfortable adding it to the actual painting. And then it's just a matter of adding in branches where you feel, whatever you think is going to work in the composition. You can add however many, however few that you'd like. It's completely up to you at this stage. This is, again, where you can be a little bit more creative. And you can see how my colors sort of vary throughout the painting. So some areas are a little bit more warm, some are a little bit more greenish. I have some of these branches are a little bit lighter as they're kind of going off into the background and sort of fading into the distance. And they don't even need to be solid lines. Breaking up those lines again kind of just adds a little bit of extra texture and a little bit of sort of light effects. And you can always go back in and darken things up or remove pigment if you want to. There really is no right or wrong here. Okay, so once you're happy with your branches, you don't want to go too overboard. You don't want to fill the entire page with branches. So we are going to add in some little red berries as well, just to add a little bit more of a contrast and just to kind of throw in another pop of color in here. So taking some of that cadmium red. And you want this to be a fairly thick mixture, so you're getting a nice pop of red. You can even tone it down a little bit with some of that burnt sienna if it's a little bit too much for you. And then just using the very tip of your brush again, you're just going to create little dots here and there, kind of where the branches taper off and they get a little bit smaller, where berries or fruit would naturally grow. And you don't need to add them to every single branch, just kind of wherever you feel like adding them. And as few, as many as you'd like. You don't even have to add them at all. This is your painting. You can get creative with it. Okay, and at this stage we're pretty much done. You can take this opportunity to go back into your bird if you'd like, if there's anything that you're not perfectly happy with. So for me, I want to go back into that red breast again and just add a little bit more pigment, just kind of bring out that saturation just a little bit more. So I think it's, as it's dried, it's toned down quite a bit. That looks good. And I'm just gonna add a little bit more black to that beak just to darken it up just a bit. Oops. And see, I made a mistake there. I didn't wait for this area to dry, and so they blended into each other, but it's totally okay. I just grab my handy dandy toilet roll and mop that up. And so now I'll just wait for that to dry and I can add in some darker areas somewhere else where it's not still wet. So like in the back of these wings, I want to add a little bit of darkness. Again, just kind of upping that contrast. Adding a little bit more shadow effect. Okay, I just want a little bit more contrast on these feet here. There we go, that's great. I'm gonna let that dry. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Once you're happy with your painting and it's all nice and dry, you can peel off your tape and sign it and you're all ready to go. So there is one trick to peeling off the tape. You don't want to peel it straight up. You want to peel it back onto itself. So This just helps prevent the tape from tearing up your paper. Another thing you can do is use your blow dryer on the tape, and that will help melt some of the adhesive and loosen it from your paper, and it'll just make it a lot easier to peel off. So you're gonna grab an end of your piece of tape and just sort of pull it back onto itself, just like that. So you're not lifting up, you're pulling it back onto itself. Just gonna do that with every piece. Just be really careful. You can take it slowly. If you find that it is ripping, you can try it from a different direction. Or again, you can just bring out that blow dryer and try that. And you do want to make sure that your paper is totally dry at this point, just to help prevent it from buckling permanently as it dries. So again, that tape is there to help sort of add some tension and pull it back straight. So that's it. You can sign your painting, or frame it, do whatever you want with it, but that's basically it. You should have some paint left over, again, if you have purchased that kit for some other paintings you can practice with. Yeah, so follow me for more tutorials. You can check out my Instagram, it's Little Rosetta Art. Again, on Instagram, my website is littlerosetta.com, basically Little Rosetta everywhere. Thank you again for joining me for this tutorial, and yeah, I hope you enjoy painting. I'll see you next time. Thanks guys, bye.